मुच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Namaste. Welcome to the last session on Bhagavad Gita, your source of inspiration by Jayaji. I request Jayaji to give us an overview of the second half of chapter 18.
We'll begin with the invocation.
सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Chapter 18, the last part. Today we conclude this most wonderful text that takes us from ordinary mortals to extraordinary mortals. So let's take a look at what it speaks of. Based on the categorization of the inner personality into sattva, rajas and tamas, all human beings have been categorized from ancient pre-Vedic times into 4 varnas or castes. This caste system deteriorated over time and became inflexible. So let's take a look at the original caste system, varnas, which is nothing but an intelligent form of vocational guidance. This distinction was not based on heredity, but on one's proportion of sattva, rajas and tamas. So the father could be one varna, mother could be another varna, children could be another varna, depending on their inner composition. After determining which varna you belong to, each caste was then given a vocation that best suited their temperament. And the purpose of this entire exercise was to facilitate the spiritual development of all and help each individual rise to the highest level of perfection. Nobody was disqualified, everyone was included, everyone was given the necessary props and guidance to reach perfection. The varnas correspond to natural archetypes that exist in all societies and act as a general guide to fulfillment and growth in life. A mismatch of inner composition with external work can be highly frustrating and prevent your progress. In verse 42, we see the traits of a Brahmana, which is the highest varna or highest caste, who is predominantly sattvic in nature. Verse 42.
शमोदमस्तपशौचम् क्षान्तिरार्जवमेव च ज्ञानं विज्ञानमास्तिक्यम् ब्रह्मकर्म स्वभावजम् शमोदमस्तपशौचम् क्षान्तिरार्जवमेव च ज्ञानं विज्ञानमास्तिक्यम् ब्रह्मकर्म स्वभावजम्.
Mind control, sense control, austerity, purity, forgiveness, and also straightforwardness, knowledge, wisdom, and belief in God are the inborn traits of a Brahmana. So, what are these qualities? Shama is mental discipline. The mind has been subdued due to past efforts at reducing desire. Also, the intellect has been developed, so it is strong and prevents the mind from slipping into indulgence, into attachment, into unproductive channels in the present. So there are no mental agitations, the mind is at peace. This peaceful mind is a powerful mind and is very rare in society today. Everybody has an agitated mind. And that prevents your talent from surfacing, it prevents you from being successful in life, leave alone happiness and spiritual growth. And such a person is content with his or her lot because of the understanding that the law of karma functions. To the extent I have done my work, my actions, the quality of actions in the past, to that extent I will have achieved success or failure. And that is a law. So you might as well accept it. Contentment does not mean that you don't have the energy or the motivation to grow. That is tamas. Sattva is where the mind is calm at the moment, but the intellect visualizes a better state to be in, spiritual goal, and strives to get there. Dhamma is the physical discipline, where you neither indulge in the sense objects nor do you unintelligently deny yourself, leading to frustration. The intellect has perfect control over the sense organs and intelligently guides them to the right amount of contact with the sense objects, such that it does not cause any disturbance in the mind. So the mind is free to focus on higher things. Then comes tapas. When you practice the mental and physical disciplines, shama and dhamma, you generate a lot of energy, and this energy is conserved because it's not allowed to dissipate in unproductive channels, and it is redirected towards spiritual growth, towards achievement of the higher. Now, in spiritual practice, you need a lot of energy, you need a lot of vitality, you need mental strength, and this requires perfect control by the intellect. So, tapas is not self-torturing practices as unintelligently denying yourself things which then cause frustration and mental agitation. So the objective of all these is to ensure that the mind is calm. Shaucham, this is repeated in the Bhagavad Gita over and over again. Shaucham means purity, means you're acutely conscious of dirt at all levels of your personality. In the absolute sense, Atman alone is pure. Everything else is impure. So to get to Atman, you need a conducive environment, clean, uncluttered surroundings. You need an uncomplicated lifestyle so that your mind is not running helter-skelter. The mind must be free from attachments and cravings and pull towards objects of the world. It must be free from likes and dislikes, and therefore not agitated. And the intellect must be clear and unmuddled. So the mind is also pure. It entertains positive emotions. Negative emotions agitate your mind. It's dirt. And clarity of thinking is purity. So you have to be pure at all levels of your personality, including the external environment. Where is that and what is going on now? India is perhaps one of the dirtiest countries. Even if you go to an African country, a less developed country than India, you find a certain basic cleanliness there. And it is shocking that not only are we dirty, but there is no awareness of dirt. And homes that are wealthy, even those are cluttered with all kinds of objects. So you enter a place like that, you feel giddy. Very few people have minimalistic environment where it is clean, neat, simple, uncomplicated, not filled with all kinds of things. Similarly, the physical body must present simple yet elegant. So your lifestyle should be like that, your physical appearance should be like that. The mind must be pure and intellect clear. Only then are you fit for taking off into higher realms of spirituality. Kshanti, forgiveness. Forgiveness comes because of growth. Like we as adults don't hold grudges against children. We understand that as children, they will do and say whatever they say. So there's no question of forgiveness. When it comes to adults, you understand vasanas will function. That everyone is driven to act according to his or her vasanas helplessly. They can't help it, and of course you can't change it. So there is an acceptance of it, and this acceptance is forgiveness. Mark Twain put it beautifully. He said, "It is forgiveness is the fragrance that a violet emits as the foot crushes it." It's such a beautiful thing. Arjavam as against Kutila. Arjavam is straightforwardness versus crookedness. A Brahmana, a sattvic person, is one who is true to his conscience and conviction. Nobody can shake him from that. And when you have this, then again the mind doesn't get agitated. You don't do things that violate your conscience. And you're always upright. In fact, you follow not only the law of the land, you follow the law of the divine. So the law of karma stands by you. Then knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge, you understand the importance of the knowledge of Vedanta. You make efforts to gain this knowledge. You give it priority, you give it importance. You study it regularly, daily. That is why we keep recommending the Bhagavad Gita pen drive, so that you can study it in your home, in your conveniently, without having to go out anywhere, on a daily basis at your pace. You don't need to speed up just because everybody else is doing it. You can do it at your pace. And then it allows for manana, reflection on what you have studied, experimentation with it, till you imbibe it, till you start living it, till you grow to that higher level. You grow into it. And that is Vijnana, wisdom. Astikya, belief in God, faith in God. Faith in God doesn't mean a blind belief. Like a scientist was asked if he believed in God. He says, "I am a scientist, therefore I believe in God." Meaning, you look at the world, you analyze, and you understand there has to be a power beyond the world. There has to be a transcendental power which has created the world, which is created the world in the sense which is the substratum of the world. So when you look at all the laws, in the world, even if you're a scientist, and you trace everything back up to a point, beyond that point, if you ask, okay, who made it or how does it happen? You say, I don't know. I don't know. Like, for instance, hearing. You hear, the sound enters your tympanum, it's carried to the middle ear, the inner ear, and then it's carried to the nerve by the nervous system to the sense center. And beyond that, what makes you hear, if you ask? Even the most brilliant scientists will have to say, I don't know. And that I don't know is God, Atman, Brahman. So this is a faith based on reason, based on rationality. It's not blind faith. Brahmanas were predominantly sattvic in nature and highly refined individuals. So everything about their personality is refined. They were therefore the role models and led the other castes. They naturally took to academics, study, research, and teaching in the fields of science, medicine, engineering, and of course philosophy. They were stalwarts in soft skills like music, art, Vedanta, literature. And because they had clarity of thought and they were established in values, they were the advisors to the other castes, particularly in the field of ethics and morality. Thus, ancient India was led by men and women of wisdom, not of wealth, unlike today. Today, you take a look at Fortune 500 or any listing of people, it is only the wealthy people who are listed. And they could be anything. They could have earned their money through any means. That is not questioned. Also, the corrosive effect of wealth was on people, on the kings, was prevented by Brahmanas intervening as advisory roles, in their advisory roles. So they guided the wealthy Kshatriyas who had wealth and power, both of which are highly corrosive and corruptive, and protected them from the influence of wealth and power. Then come the Kshatriyas. So the Brahmanas were predominantly sattvic in nature. The moment you came to Kshatriyas, they were predominantly rajasic in nature. So the Brahmanas were predominantly sattvic with a little bit of rajas and traces of traces of tamas. I repeat, Brahmanas predominantly sattvic, little of rajas and traces of sattva. Kshatriyas predominantly rajasic, enough sattva and tamas creeping up. So Kshatriyas, ruler and warrior caste, they had administrative and management skills, were predominantly rajasic. The Vaishyas, traders, businessmen had more tamas and less sattva. And the Shudras, labor class, were predominantly tamasic with a little bit of rajas and traces of sattva. So each could get to the highest level of perfection by being true to their nature. And this nature, the Swadharma, which was emphasized in chapter 3, is repeated here in verse 47.
श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् स्वनुष्ठितात् स्वभावनियतं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्.
Swadharma, one's own duty, even if devoid of merit, is superior to paradharma, another's duty accomplished well. One who performs action dictated by one's own nature does not incur sin. So, this ability to identify your own swadharma, your nature, your talent, your passion, that special gift that you have been born with is extremely important. And then pursuing it, investing your energies and your time in it, and making it your vocation in life is extremely important. If you choose a field that is alien to your nature, it becomes extremely frustrating and you do not achieve success. So he emphasizes here that one who performs action dictated by one's own nature does not incur sin, means does not add vasanas to his system. So when you're working in your swadharma, you are fulfilling the vasanas that you are born with. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of satisfaction, and if in that swadharma you dedicate your actions to a higher ideal, you get cleansed of vasanas. Not only your swadharma vasana, other vasanas as well. Then Krishna encapsulates the entire spiritual path in verses 46 to 57, starting with the three practices of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, and ending with meditation. In verse 52, he gives 5 qualities that one needs to cultivate to evolve spiritually. So let's take a look at verse 52.
विविक्तसेवी लघ्वाशी यतवाक्कायमानसः ध्यानयोगपरो नित्यं वैराग्यं समुपाश्रितः.
Seeking solitude, eating only a little, controlling speech, body and mind, always engaged in the yoga of meditation, taking refuge in dispassion. Vivikta Sevi means seeking solitude. Now, this doesn't mean that you have a hatred for people. What it means is that you are not dependent on having people around you. You're not hankering after company. You don't feel a lack within if people are not around, which is what is happening today. So nowadays, if you don't have people around you, then you resort to social media, you use technology to get across to people. You send messages on WhatsApp, you connect in some way or the other. And you're dependent on that. Here is a person who is self-sufficient and does not need anybody else. He's very content to be by himself, and that is conducive for his spiritual practice. So he's quite happy to be alone. But at the same time, he loves everybody. He interacts with everyone. He feels connected with everybody. So that has nothing to do with the solitude. So there are people who feel extremely lonely when they are alone. Here is a person who's alone but never lonely. Then Laghvashi, eating a little. This doesn't mean you should starve, like many people nowadays, particularly ladies, go on a starvation diet to lose weight. It's not about that. It is that each person has a requirement of food depending on their metabolic rate. So because a Brahmana is at a high level, his thinking is at a high level, he's not obsessed with food, he's not hanging on food all the time, and does not overeat. He just eats exactly what is necessary to keep his body going, to remain healthy. Now take a look at us. Most people are foodies. So there is that fascination for food, there is the obsession with food, and there is the liking for food. So you operate on likes and dislikes. You want everything that you like. And as a result, you end up overeating at almost every meal. Therefore, a sattvic person, a brahmana, eats less. Also, when you're introverted, your need for food automatically reduces because your metabolic rate is such that you need less food to maintain the same health and dynamism and energy. Yatavakaya manasaha, speech, body and mind controlled. See, we are designed in such a way that your sense objects are naturally gravitating towards sense objects of the world, so they look outward. The mind is constantly seeking emotions, emotional support from outside, so mind is also looking outward. It is only the intellect that has the capacity to, number one, rein in the sense organs as well as the mind and refocus it on achieving the higher, for which you need to look within. Then the energies of the body and the mind are conserved and are available for you to redirect towards the higher. So this is the reason why speech, body and mind are controlled. Now take us, all three are gone. Once you start speaking, you don't stop. There is no control over speaking. You say the most absurd things and then regret it later. Sense indulgence goes on and the mind operates on likes and dislikes, gets attached to things. So there is no energy to speak of within you. You're a dissipated person. Then dhyana yoga paro nitya, open-minded meditation. When he talks about being always engaged in the yoga of meditation, he's not talking about sitting there, shutting your eyes and repeating a mantra. That you can't do always. But he's referring to open-eyed meditation where in your normal daily activity, wherever you go, whatever you see, whoever you interact with, there is something that reminds you of Atman all the time. So that earthing is firm. You look at a sunrise or sunset, you see nowadays the rain and you wonder what a wonderful world has been created. How perfectly everything functions. How do the monsoons know when to appear? And most importantly, when to stop. The sun always rises at the precise moment. Never late, never too early. Can you imagine what would happen if the sun were to rise at 3 a.m.? So you're always in a state of ashcharya, always remembering Atman. That is dhyana yoga. And as a result of all this, vairagyam samupashrita, you're automatically dispassionate towards the world, you're detached, not excited, yet you interact with the world to whatever extent you need to, with energy, dynamism, enthusiasm, and commitment. But indulgence, no. So sense objects run away from you in despair because you have no appetite for it. It's because there is a demand and supply that functions. Then in verse 53, Krishna gives 6 negativities that you need to free yourself from to be prepared for spiritual development. Verse 53.
Ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimuccha nirmama shantaha brahma bhuyaya kalpate.
Having forsaken egoism, power, haughtiness, desire, anger and avarice, without minus, one who is peaceful, shanta, is qualified to become Brahman. So, Who is fit for Brahman? One who is free from all these negativities. Ahankara, the excessive focus on me, I, me, myself. So, ego functions in three ways, and you see this around you. I am the best. Even the guy on the street feels I am the best. I only exist. So, the example of Emperor Nero, who wanted to remember a tune, and he set fire to Rome because there was a fire when that tune was played. Utter disregard to the pain and torture, suffering that he inflicted on a whole lot of people. This is the way most Indians drive. You drive as if you're the only person who exists on the roads, and there's no consideration for anyone else who's driving. And I am the doer. So you may achieve a little bit, but that I am the doer attitude destroys everything. So people around you feel like saying, "Arey, stop doing." But we want to be free from this ego. Balam, the power that comes from passion, desire, selfishness, like Hitler. And then once you gain that power, you abuse it. Most people abuse it. All political masters abuse it. Many kings had abused it. Many industrialists, wealthy people, abuse the power that they have. So there is a tendency to want to bully others into surrender. There's some kick that people get out of wielding power. This power is different from the power that comes from spirituality, from Atman, which is not even used, much less abused. Darpa, arrogance, a vulgar, disproportionate focus on one's ability with complete disregard to other people's contributions in your success. So this results in everyone saying, I did this, I did that. So anyone who uses I and says it in an emphatic manner, is full of darpa and ahankara. Parigraha, covetousness. There is this incredible tendency in people to always want what somebody else has. So when you sit at the dining table and there is food, so some people want one thing, you're always looking at somebody else's plate and saying, what is it that you are having? I also want. That is parigraha, covetousness. And this has nothing to do with what you have. Some of the richest people in the world have this covetousness. It's a horrible feeling because this stems from you're unhappy with whatever you have. You're not even looking at what you have. You're looking at one little thing that somebody else has, which you're not having. Now, when you overcome all of these, you are fit for becoming Brahman. So, the spiritual path is 99% hard work, preparation, and only 1% inspiration. So, you have to be prepared for this long haul. Then, Krishna cautions Arjuna and all of us on the consequences of disregarding his advice, not only in the 18th chapter, right through, right from the 2nd chapter onwards. If you shift your focus to Atman, you will overcome all obstacles. But if you ignore divinity in your life and get lost in the material realms, get entangled in the world, you will perish. This is not a curse, but it's just a statement of fact, statement of law. He's just telling us what will happen to you when you do different things. And we will do well to heed his advice. Krishna then beautifully summarizes the entire spiritual path in verses 65 and 66, which we'll take a look at now. Verse 65.
मन्मना भव मद्भक्तः मद्याजी मां नमस्कुरु मामे वैश्यसि सत्यं ते प्रतिजाने प्रियोऽसि मे.
Place your mind on me, be devoted to me, sacrifice to me, prostrate to me. You will come to me alone. I give you my word truly, for you are dear to me. So, Manmana is the intellectual discipline where your focus is on Atman, and whatever you experience in life, you are only thinking of, oh, it is Atman that enables me to see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Every emotion that passes through my mind is enabled by Atman. Every thought that flits through the intellect is empowered by Atman. And so my entire being is focused on Atman while interacting with the world. So all this goes on, but the focus is on Atman. It's like in classical music. A classical musician sings various ragas, various compositions set to different talas, but he's aligned to that one note sound. If he slips, he sings Besura. So classical living is like this. Then he says, Bhava Madbhaktaha. Be devoted to me. Feel the presence of the divine everywhere. This divinity splashed everywhere. You should be able to see the hand of providence. That there is a divine provider who's providing all of us with whatever we need. You don't understand what it is, but you know there is some power behind the universe, beyond the universe, that is doing all this, and you stand aghast, ashcharya, at this mysterious power that is enabling all this. Madhyaji, so you understand, Manmana is intellectual focus. Madbhakta is just a feeling. You don't understand, but there's a feeling. Madhyaji, the physical body must sacrifice. So every action that you perform is oblated to the achievement of self-realization. Namaskuru, actual Sashtang Namaskar, where the head and heart are in line with the feet of the deity or Atman. The ego is subdued, and because you understand that you are not the individual, you are just a manifestation of Atman. And if you do all this, you will reach me, is what he says. And now comes the most famous, one of the most famous verses of the Bhagavad Gita, which most people learn by heart, because it is, the moment you say Bhagavad Gita, this is one of the verses that comes to mind. Verse 66.
सर्वधर्मान् परित्यज्य मामेकं शरणं व्रज अहं त्वा सर्वपापेभ्यः मोक्षयिष्यामि मा शुचः.
Sarvadharman Parityajya, having totally abandoned all dharmas, attributes. Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, take refuge in me alone. Then do not grieve, ma shuchaha. Aham tva sarva papebhya mokshayishyami. I will release you from all sin. So the word dharma is a highly flexible word which means different things in different contexts. So it could mean duty, righteousness, nature, charity, essential nature. In this context, he means essential nature, like the dharma of sugar is sweetness, dharma of fire is heat, dharma of the sun is light, so on and so forth. So it is the essential aspect which makes it what it is, without which it will not be what it is. So come to us. Our only mission is to get to Atman, because its nature is Akhandananda. Akhandananda, unbroken bliss, infinite bliss. And this infinite bliss we are seeking consciously or unconsciously right through our lives. Every moment of our life, we are seeking this bliss, not finite, infinite bliss. And until we reach that state, we will not rest content. It's like when there is a coil spring that is 4 feet high. If you compress it to 1 foot, there will be pressure on the palm to go back to its original state. Release it to 2 feet, the pressure is less, but it's still there. Come to 3 feet, less pressure, but still pressure. It is only when you release it completely to 4 feet that there is no more pressure on the palm. Similarly, you and I, our original nature is infinite bliss. Today we are all compressed, badly compressed. So there is that urge, there is that yearning, thirsting after happiness. The only thing is you're searching for it in the wrong place, and you'll never get it there, which is in the world. Because happiness is not a commodity that is available in the malls of the world. So you're wasting your time if you're looking for happiness there. Not just your time, your entire life, life after life. Aneka janma, we are only going up the wrong lead. So, anyone who takes a right about turn, looks within, finds happiness, true happiness, and ultimately when he hits Atman, he reaches that state of realization, and then all realized persons have declared that I have reached the ultimate, I don't need anything else. Like Swami Ramatirtha, in 1902, was actually given a check by a Maharaja for 2 lakhs to start an institution. He returned the check to the Maharaja saying, I don't need to start my own institution because all institutions are my institutions. What a man. 2 lakhs in 1902, you have to calculate and see how much it is in modern times. That is what he refused. Now here, in this verse, what he is saying is, when he says sarva dharman parityajya, drop the dharma of the body, mind and intellect. So the dharma of the body is perceptions and actions. The body perceives and acts, that is its dharma, that's its nature. The dharma of the mind is feelings and emotions. And the dharma of the intellect is thoughts and ideas. So he's saying renounce these. Why? Because they are not your original nature. And turn inward. So renounce your involvement with them, your infatuation to them, your entanglement with them. How? By turning your attention inward, by taking refuge in me. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. The moment you turn inward, you're free from preoccupations with the world. It's like a housewife who's constantly getting after servants and nitpicking and petty little things she gets agitated about. The moment she takes to a career and goes out, her involvement, her her fascination, attachment with the home reduces, and all the servants are happy because she stops getting after them. This is it. So, this practice has to be total. Therefore, he uses the word sarva dharma. It can't be in bits and pieces, it's got to be total. And parityajya, renounce completely. Only then will you get the benefit of this letting go. In any field, at any time, when you surrender, it removes the agitation. So that's why he says, grieve not, don't worry. Don't worry about the result. Just do what you have to do. The result will come. Result means realization. So he gives an assurance that I will give it. Actually, what is he doing? He's not doing anything. We are the ones who have to do all the work. But the sharanagati, the surrender, helps to make your mind calm. Like Prahlada, the little boy, had this quality of sharanagati, which is why he was unperturbed even when his own father was trying to kill him. Don't you think that's an outstanding quality? A child has that. The mother will whack the child, the mother will scream at the child, the mother does all sorts of things to the child, but the child immediately goes back to the mother. That is Sharanagati. Hanuman had that surrender to Lord Ram. That is why Hanuman and Prahlada and all such people were completely free from anxiety. They were not perturbed, they were not bothered about when will I reach realization, will I get there, what if I don't get there? No such thing. Krishna then leaves you to do what you want. He says, I have told you, Arjuna, everything that I need to tell you. Now it's up to you. Yatha ichhasi tatha kuru. This is the most fantastic line in the entire Bhagavad Gita, because believe me, going through 701 verses is not a joke. It's not possible for ordinary people to do it. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of trouble, and Krishna has done this for Arjuna. But he is not interested means he's not a stakeholder in this business at all. He has done what he ought to do, and now he lets go and says, do what you want, do what you like. Yatha ichhasi tatha kuru. He doesn't even say, think over it and do what you ought to do or what your intellect tells you to do. Just says, Yatha ichhasi tatha kuru. It is Arjuna who wakes up and says, Nashto moha smritir labdha. My delusion has gone, Krishna. It is your prasad. It's your grace. I now know what to do, and I will do it. And as we all know, he fought the battle and won. And this is the promise that has been given to all of us, that if you follow the words of Krishna, you will fight your battles with what? The enemy within, and emerge victorious. So, the Bhagavad Gita is not a doctrine of adesha, commandments, that must be accepted and followed without question. It is upadesha, advice based on a logical scientific treatise on the human personality. You need to reflect deeply on these principles, examine them from different angles, experiment with them, and draw your own conclusions, exactly as you would with physics or chemistry. Then you will live them. You will experience the truths laid down in the Gita and find liberation while living in the world. Jivan Mukti. You will live like a king, think like a sannyasi. command the resources of the world, but be completely independent of them. What a state. Sanjaya concludes in the last few verses by praising Krishna and exulting in this most extraordinary and sacred dialogue that he was witness to between Yogeshwara, the Lord of Yoga, Krishna, and a realized soul, an avatar of Lord Vishnu, and Arjuna, an outstanding student. And he ends by saying, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shri Vijayor Bhutir, Dhruva Nitir Matir Mama. Means wherever, whenever in the future there is a Krishna, the Lord of Yoga, and wherever there is Partha Dhanurdhara, the archer, there will be prosperity. See, he doesn't talk about spiritual enlightenment. He's saying the first thing that will happen when you follow the spiritual path is you will gain immense prosperity. Shri means prosperity. Vijaya, victory. Bhuti, glory, magnificence. And Niti, firm justice. This is it. So, what he's saying is, it's not only at that time, but at any time in future, at any time, where there is an enlightened master and an ego student, this will be the result. So, generations thereafter followed this advice, and we, India, experienced this golden era of tremendous prosperity. But sound principles, values, where, like historians report, there were no locks in any home because nobody would steal. And internal happiness and justice. It is in our hands. Every one of us can apply these principles in our life, and to the extent that we have influence around us, we will establish this prosperity, happiness, justice, victory. So, as we come to the end of the Bhagavad Gita in these sessions, in these 10 sessions, let us all commit to ourselves that we will learn the words of Krishna, reflect over them, experiment with them, apply them in our lives, and not let go till we live them. And once we live them, this will be the result. Thank you.